Welcome to the Kent Lap Podcast.
The first thing is just understand that this isn't just a nice thing to do. Like, this is a biblical mandate. Like, there's nothing, like, Jesus didn't mince his words when he said, Father, might they be one as you and I are one, so that the world might know that you love them and that you sent me for them. Right? That wasn't a suggestion like, well, if they feel like it, can they be one? No.
Yep.
And so I would just say, and if people don't believe it, do your own study. Like, go into the scriptures and do your own study about unity and justice. Paul tells us that we've been given the ministry of reconciliation. We've been given, not the government, not the unbelievers. The church has been given the ministry of reconciliation, reconciling men and women to God, and then reconciling men and women to each other. So I would say, go into the scriptures and make sure that you have a personal conviction from the Holy Spirit that this is what you are to do. Why? Because it's hard, man. This is not an easy thing, right? People will talk about you. They will write about you. You will lose family friendships and members over this stuff. It looks real nice on the surface, but man, when you start dealing with this issue on the deeper, you see some real stuff.
That. Yeah, I believe
and
that.
So my first thing would be to make sure that you are convicted about the fact that this is where you need to be. Secondly, you've got to begin to educate yourself. I have a list of books, documentaries, movies that I hand out during my class. I also do Brad and I, we do our discussion on race down at Merides when it was open.
Yeah.
So I've handed out that list to those folks. And I just challenge, especially white people, but black people too. Because what I've learned is we don't know our history either. Like, we grew up in the same country as you all did, right? We got the same education as you guys did.
Yep.
And so unless you went to a HBCU, historically black college university, which I did, and paid attention to black history.
Okay.
Right? Because I was one of those guys who I went to an HBCU, but I was like, man, I don't need all of this stuff.
Yeah.
I just give me the business principles. I'm trying to go make money.
Yes.
My history is not going to help me make money in corporate America, which is predominantly white, right? So it wasn't until I came here and I had some of our white congregation members asking me, like, so I was reading about W.E.B. Du Bois the other day, and I saw that he had a different perspective and I was like, haven't read that. So let me go read it first.
Yeah.
And that's when I started saying, man, I've got to read some of this stuff, because I had members, white members, who were reading for the first time and educating themselves.
Yep.
And then they would come to me with questions.
Yeah.
And I didn't have answers because it wasn't important to me.
Yes.
I had bought into the lie that it's not, our lives are not important. So why spend time? And so I started reading, this is probably like 15, 20 years ago now, and just continuously reading. And so I would encourage people to pick up books written by, African-American authors. And then change the lens by which you read this stuff. Because what I've learned is I can tell people to read, but what I've seen, man, is white people read almost to negate what's being said. Like, this is a black author, so I got to make sure that I make sure that,
it's this deep-seated bias that they're working against. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
And again, it comes from racist ideas. Like, that's why I keep telling my class, I want you to keep seeing how these racist ideas from the 14 and 1500s are continuing to affect the way we think today.
Yeah.
So read. And there are plenty of books out there. I've mentioned a number of them just in this discussion. Ibram Kendi is a great author. Again, he wrote one book a couple years back called Stamped from the Beginning, which is, he chronicles the lives of Cotton Mather, Thomas Jefferson, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Angela Davis. He chronicles their lives, and he really gives us the origin of racist ideas and how they have matriculated through the early part of history. It is a good. It's
stamped from the beginning.
Read. Yeah, it's a thick read, but it's a good one.
Okay.
And then he just released earlier this year, maybe, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which is another really good book. And in that book, he basically confesses that he was one of those black people who had bought the lie that it was black people's fault that they're in the position that they're in. And he talks about his transition. He also talks about this concept that I gravitated towards when I heard it, and it's called living in this dual consciousness. And that is living in the consciousness of who you really are, and then who people say you are, who the culture says you are as a black man, but who you really are, and kind of getting to a place where you can, what's the word I want here? Where you can come to a place of agreement on both. Like, and what I've learned is most great thinkers have had to wrestle with this dual consciousness. W.E.B. Du Bois was one, right? He thought that if I'm just educated enough, if I'm just good enough, then maybe white people will see me and say that I'm equal with them. He spent most of the first part of his life with that concept, with that consciousness, and that's the reason why he developed this group called the Talented 10th. And what they was this group of African Americans who had aspired educationally, and they had this group. The crazy thing about this is that they were predominantly light-skinned people.
Okay.
Which is a whole nother discussion on the light-skinned, dark-skinned issue with African Americans within our culture. But what he found was that they still didn't accept him or the members of the Talented 10th. And so by the end of his life, he had moved on to the other side where he was just like, man, it's just not, there's nothing that we can do that would cause white people to see us as equal. So he ended up moving to Ghana, and he's buried in Ghana. He died in Ghana. They have a tomb erected in his honor in Ghana, West Africa. And so, but he went through that. And I think as African Americans, many of us go through that. Like we think, man, if I just get educated enough, if I just learn to code switch enough, if I learn their language enough, if my English if my diction is just good enough, then maybe they'll look at me and say, man, this guy is just like me. He's equal to me. And that the older you get, I think, in wisdom, you begin to see, man, you know what? I don't know if that'll ever change. That notion of white supremacy is so embedded in the DNA of our country that I don't know if it'll ever subside.
And also, if it gets better just because you come like them, that's not even winning either.
Right. Exactly. Because, wow, we're all fallen individuals.
Exactly.
Right. And so you can be as great as you want to be. But I've seen this too. I've seen that for African Americans, we pretty much have to be pretty doggone good. And the moment we make one mistake, we're done. I'm done with you. I thought you were extraordinary. And as long as we're extraordinary, we can kind of hang. But when we make a mistake, sorry. We're cut off. And so, but reading will allow you to see a lot of this stuff. And Ibram makes a point. Daniel Hill is another author. He wrote a book called Wide Awake. He's a pastor up in Chicago. And you mentioned it earlier how you kind of go through these stages where you first realize, oh man, this is going on. Then you got angry. Then you got like, you were less hopeful. Well, the book Wide Awake kind of is Daniel's story of how he walked through those stages. He calls them stages of whiteness. It's a really, really good book.
White Awake?
White Awake.
White Awake.
Yeah,
okay.
White Awake,
Yeah.
Daniel Hill. There's another great book by, I mentioned hers, Robin DiAngelo, White Fragility. That's a hard book for white people to read. She's a white woman, and she just brings it. She's like, look, I don't care. I'm just going to tell the truth. And it's good. It's really good. And like I said, I get a lot of my language from her, but it's a hard read.